They say life has its own quiet yet relentless way of balancing the scales, almost like it keeps a secret list of everything we do, patiently waiting for the right moment to even things out. Sometimes you see it happen right before your eyes, like an instant reaction. Other times, it can take years, even decades, silently working in the background. But one truth stands firm. Karma doesn't forget. It doesn't matter how far you run, how much you hide, or how perfect things may look from the outside. It's always there, watching, waiting. And that brings us to Jack Miller. On the surface, Jack was the man people admired, envied, and maybe even resented in a quiet, unspoken way. He had crafted a life that looked flawless, almost cinematic. As the CEO of a rapidly growing real estate company in New York, his name was printed in glossy business magazines, his interviews played on finance podcasts, and his handshake could open doors most people only dreamed of. He glided through the city streets in his sleek black Mercedes, the polished paint reflecting the skyscrapers like a moving mirror. At night, that same car would pull into the private parking of his luxury apartment, a modern, glass-walled residence with a breathtaking view of Central Park. From his balcony, the city lights stretched endlessly, the park below a peaceful patch of dark green in a restless sea of neon and traffic. Jack himself was a presence you couldn't miss. He carried himself with a kind of effortless authority, the kind that turned heads the moment he walked into a room. His wardrobe was a carefully chosen collection of tailored suits, crisp shirts, and expensive watches. But the most striking part of him was that smile. Not just any smile, but one that radiated confidence. It wasn't loud or arrogant, yet it had a way of making you believe he was unstoppable, that nothing could touch him. People saw that smile and assumed he had it all figured out. What they didn't see, or maybe what they chose not to see, was that smiles can sometimes hide more than they reveal. But behind that perfectly polished image, beneath the expensive suits and charming smile, Jack carried a habit that was far from harmless. In fact, it was dangerous. He had mastered the art of bending rules until they nearly snapped, and cutting corners so sharply it left others bleeding in ways they couldn't always see. He didn't lose sleep over who might get hurt in the process. The fallout was never his concern. If there was an opportunity to take advantage of someone, whether it was a desperate client, a trusting partner, or an employee who couldn't afford to push back, Jack wouldn't just consider it, he would seize it without hesitation. For him, business wasn't about building relationships or trust. It was about the quickest route to profit, no matter how crooked the path. The moment he spotted a chance to make a quick buck, he was on it, like a hawk swooping down on prey, his mind already calculating the gain before the other person even realized they were in danger. He had a way of making these moves seem almost normal, as if this was simply how the game was played in the real world. And while others might feel guilt or second thoughts, Jack carried none. To him, winning was all that mattered, and the rules were just flexible suggestions. One bitter winter, when the air in New York carried that sharp, biting chill and the ground crunched under every step, Jack came across a deal that would test the very core of who he was, though for him, it was just another business move. On the outskirts of the city, far from the glass towers and neon lights he was used to, there was a quiet stretch of land that had belonged to the Johnson family for as long as anyone in that small town could remember. For the Johnsons, this land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was where generations had lived, worked, and poured their sweat into the soil. It held their childhood laughter, the echoes of family gatherings, and the steady rhythm of seasons changing over decades. Old wooden fences leaned slightly from years of weather. The barn stood weathered but proud, and the trees swayed in the same wind that had carried the voices of their ancestors. This place was their history, their memories, and their main source of livelihood. But times had been cruel to them. A downturn in the economy, mounting bills, and a string of bad harvests had left the Johnsons in financial distress. Jack knew every detail of their struggle, not because he cared, but because he had done his homework, and where most people might have seen a family in need and offered a fair, compassionate deal, Jack saw an opening. He moved in with calculated precision, hiding his intentions behind warm smiles and polite conversations. He spoke in smooth, reassuring tones, framing himself as someone there to help. But beneath those friendly words, he was already weaving a trap, carefully exploiting legal loopholes they didn't even know existed. The contract he handed them was thick with fine print, the kind of language that made an average person's head spin. The Johnsons, trusting his word and desperate for relief, signed without realizing what they were truly giving up. When the ink dried, Jack walked away as the new owner of their land, and he had paid barely half of what it was worth. The Johnsons were left standing on the same soil that had been theirs for generations, only now it belonged to someone else. Jack didn't look back. To him, it was just business. The Johnsons lost everything. One day they had a home filled with warmth, photographs on the walls, and memories in every corner, and the next, it was all gone. The life they had built piece by piece over the years was stripped away in a matter of weeks. They ended up in a cramped rental home in another town, a place that felt more like a shelter than a home. The rooms were small, the paint peeling in spots, the floors creaking under every step. At night, they lay in silence, listening to the hum of an old refrigerator, each lost in their own thoughts, wondering how they'd ended up here. Their dreams, the ones they had once spoken about with hope and excitement, were now nothing more than broken pieces they didn't know how to put back together. And Jack, he didn't lose a single night's sleep over it. There was no guilt, no second guessing, no moment of reflection. In his mind, this was just how the world worked. Business is business, he would tell himself, as if those words alone erased the human cost of his decisions. To him, the Johnsons were just another deal closed, another transaction filed away in the past. Years passed. With every passing month, Jack's company expanded. Bigger offices, more clients, larger profits. But along with his success, something else grew. His arrogance. He walked through life as if the world owed him a clear path, as if nothing and no one could stand in his way. He believed with absolute certainty that he was untouchable. And then came the project, the one that would change everything, the kind of deal that promised to take his empire to the next level, or bring it crashing down. Jack planned to build a luxury resort on that very land he had taken from the Johnsons. It was going to be his crown jewel, the project that would put his name on the map. Investors were pouring in money, blueprints were finalized, and the construction was about to begin. But right before the groundbreaking, something unexpected happened. The local community fought back. A group of environmental activists filed a lawsuit, claiming that the land was a protected wetland area. At the forefront of that movement was none other than Sarah Johnson, the youngest daughter of the family Jack had wronged years ago. Sarah had grown up, gone to law school, and returned with a mission: to protect her family's legacy and fight for justice. She didn't just have passion, she had evidence. Old documents, hidden clauses in the contract, and proof of Jack's manipulation. The legal battle was brutal. Jack threw money, lawyers, and influence into the fight. But Sarah was relentless. She stood in court and laid out every detail of how Jack had taken advantage of her family. The media caught the story, and soon, Jack wasn't the untouchable CEO anymore. He was the greedy businessman who stole from a small-town family. The case ended with a crushing blow to Jack. Not only did he lose the resort project, but he was also ordered to pay millions in damages. His investors pulled out, his reputation collapsed, and the company he had built started crumbling from the inside. The final blow came when Jack walked past the old land one last time. He saw Sarah there, standing tall, with her family by her side. The land wasn't for sale anymore. It was protected, safe, and out of his reach forever. Jack realized then, standing in the cold wind, that karma had finally caught up to him. It hadn't come immediately, but it had come with a force he could never have predicted. Karma doesn't wear a watch. It doesn't care about your schedule, but it always, always comes back.